Ladies and gentlemen, we are back at Hominem Podcast. I'm Ben. That's Nick. Today we have a guest of cunning intelligence, a friend of mine, Wayne Gregoire. How you doing, Wayne?
Hey, not too bad. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to talk something other than sports for a change.
Yeah, of course. And you were one of the first ones to reach out to me personally about being on the podcast, so I appreciate it. Um, for those who don't know, the way we know each other, we actually met um, in a Manchester basketball league, NBA run by Carl Doucette. Um, we got out on the golf course a few times together, but one of the things that I think we both have enjoyed about each other is the conversations we have on social media. And so obviously that is one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show. You have a lot of great opinions on things, well thought out takes, and that's what this show is all about. Before we get into topics, I do want the listeners to kind of know a little bit more about you, what you do, where you're from. Why don't you take it away and give us a little preview?
Sure. Yeah, I am in the great state of New Hampshire. I live in Laconia, which is the Lakes region. That's where they have the bike week, one of the, I think, 3 or 4 major bike weeks in the nation every year. And I've been married now for about 15 years. I've got a daughter, and I work in sales. I sell business financing. And huge sports fan. Like I said, I met you on the basketball court. I played golf. I played baseball in high school, football, soccer. So anything sports related, I'm down.
Awesome.
I love that. Wayne, I don't know, because you and I are kind of getting acquainted here as well, but I'm also a huge soccer fan. Played for the majority of my life, even from the time I was a little kid. So it's nice to have somebody who's familiar with the game, because Ben here is a little bit ignorant to it.
Yeah, the beautiful game.
That's right. That's right. Sorry, Ben.
No problem. And so, obviously, one of the things that kind of informs all our decisions lately, something that has affected us all in some way, is this COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, a lot of states opening back up. And so, to get things started, to get it out of the way, because obviously it's been a huge topic lately for really anybody who has a podcast. What are some of your thoughts on the states reopening, specifically New Hampshire, how they've done, and whether you have any concerns in general, or as a father, you're one of the first parents we've had on the show. What are some of your thoughts there?
I think we are opening up a little bit too early, and I don't blame the politicians for that. I think that they're being pressured by the businesses to do it. We see it all the time. People who own small businesses talking about how they're struggling. These big rallies. People want to go back to work. They want to go out to eat, and I think people are. I understand the frustration. I really do, but I think that pressure onto the politicians has forced them to prematurely open. And I think that we're going to actually see a second wave of this COVID-19, which is going to be worse than the first one. And it's all because people are going to the beach now, and people are going out to eat, and people are going to play basketball. And as much as I love Carl, I know he's struggling. He wants to get that basketball league up and running. But, you got to play this as safe as possible. I'm not going back to work. Like, our office is allowing us to go back to work. We want to, but I'm not going back until I'm forced to.
Yeah. I mean, so, and obviously there are multiple, there are multiple factors there. I think obviously it depends on the state. New Hampshire has had a relatively low number of cases. That may be because of how well the state has handled it, and how quickly we kind of put into place our stay-at-home order. So I completely get that sentiment. What has the talks been about resuming like classroom schedules and schools for the kids been like? That's not something that we've really had any exposure to, and I'm interested as to what they're talking about there going into the next school year.
They're very unsure. And I know that they just had the whole homeschooling thing, which was very tough for a lot of people. I know it was easier with us because my wife is a teacher at Plymouth State University. So she was also staying home and being able to teach via video conferences and whatnot. And, being able to help my daughter with her homework, which was frustrating for all of us because the teachers weren't communicating with the parents, and then the students don't really know what to do, and they don't have anyone there over their shoulder to help out. And so it became a giant cluster mess. And I just think that hopefully it doesn't continue in the next year, but I know that there has been talks, even in Laconia, that this may carry over into the fall, and they may not start school on time. They may have to start at home, and even throughout the school year, doing a combination of home and school, kind of rotating so that there aren't as many kids in the school building.
I'm curious too, because I'm in North Carolina, so this is kind of a question for the both of you. You guys are talking a lot about, I keep hearing you guys say reopening. What does that mean in New Hampshire right now? What does reopening mean? Does that mean we're using Sandy wipes and we are putting the sort of Germ-X out there for people and it's business as usual? Is that what that means back home? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think so. Take that one first if you want.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that reopening means basically getting back to life as we're used to it, maybe with a couple of caveats like wearing a mask and, staying certain distances. But like, for example, my office, like I mentioned, I work in an office of about 50 people. Right. We can't have full capacity in there. It's just, you can't have more than, I think it's 10 or 12 people. And now they're opening up to a little bit more. But I think when we talk about states reopening, I'm thinking of more people trying to live life like COVID isn't going on. And I think that that's where I get scared and where I get nervous. I understand a slow open, but I don't even think we're ready for a slow open yet.
Well, it's fascinating, too, because, Wayne, I'm in North Carolina, and down here it has been, it's become sort of a joke that we're not even walking into an opening at this point. We are still in a slow crawl. So go a little bit further back. I don't know how familiar you are with COVID and how it's hit in North Carolina, but the state of North Carolina was under a state of emergency before the city of New York. So we've been in lockdown. We were like the first place to go in entire lockdown. Governor Roy Cooper down here was like, we're shutting it down. These folks from Biogen came through our airport. They infected some TSA, and we're not having it because we don't know what's going on. So they shut down like early March. It was pretty much like the state's been on lockdown. They opened phase 1 last month in April. Now we were supposed to open phase 2 2 weeks ago. And now the cases have spiked so high that they're talking about going back into the phase 1 measurements. And compounding all this, you have like the amount of protesting and things that are going on. And I mean, you have the news outlets that aren't even covering COVID for the most part anymore. They're just reporting the numbers. And they're going out and they're interviewing people who are doing protests and people who are, to your point, acting like life is just without COVID. And they're interviewing protesters without masks on, large groups, large congregations of people. I don't think I even need to shed any light on what's going on in Atlanta right now. But I'm wondering, I guess my whole thing with New Hampshire, is there like that phasing process like we've seen here, or are they just like all or nothing?
I'm gonna take a little bit of that, and then we'll go back to Wayne. So I think there has been a phasing, right? Like there have been phases in how businesses have reopened and what businesses have reopened, as well as how much. Certain restaurants are still at need to maintain a certain capacity. Right. Stores are still encouraged to have windows at their cash registers. Everyone's required to wear, PPE to keep everyone safe. And so I'm wondering if, and Wayne, maybe this is where you can pick up along with what Nick asked, but I'm wondering how much this has to do with really kind of the lack of information all the way through, right? I mean, we're dealing with a pandemic, and yet the information coming out of the CDC most recently is, when you consider all the factors, is about a 0.26% mortality rate for this disease. on top of the fact that the WHO and the CDC both kind of disagree as to what precautions to take, whether masks are effective. Do you think the kind of the way the media covers this and the lack of concrete information as far as treatments, how to protect yourself, does that have anything to do with your concern about reopening, or is it literally just we don't have enough information in general to do that yet?
It's a combination of the factors. And I'm glad you brought up like the way the media is covering everything, and you talked about like covering the riots and things like that. Right. And I do believe that people are pretty much, for the most part, robots, and their programmers are the media. And the media, as soon as they go onto another topic, everybody forgets about that first topic because their programmers aren't telling them about it. And so in the minds of the robotic general public, I think you have people who've completely forgotten about COVID within a matter of days, and it is still out there. And that's what worries me. It's not so much that there isn't a lot of information. I know that I'm not one of the higher at-risk people, but at the same time, we don't completely know everything. And we do know that if people aren't cautious, which as soon as they forget about COVID, which they have, a lot of them, they're going to go out there, no masks on. They're going to go out there. They're not going to sanitize things. They're going to catch it. They're going to be asymptomatic. So they're going to keep going to work, and they're going to infect 3 people who, go to the hospital because they can't breathe. And even if they don't die, that's a rough time, man, to be away from work for 2-3 weeks because you're coughing up, giant chunks of things. It's just, I don't want any part of it. I don't want to go back to work until we're all completely healthy.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think that at this point, I had a conversation with a colleague because Wayne, I work in sales as well, and the colleague mentioned to me, we're kind of fortunate, right, in sales because we can work remotely. It doesn't impact us like it impacts other industries. And I put a disclaimer on that statement and said, yet, right? Because if you see another spike where obviously the market took a hit, and I hear it every day. I mean, I work in tech sales. I hear it every conversation that I have with a customer, with a prospect. Our budget's tight. We have some money right now, but we can't spend anything. You know what I mean? So there's like everybody's putting on pause because the anticipation is by fall, we're going to see another huge spike. And if that happens, you're talking about maybe a larger recession than what we saw previously with the market, right? And now our jobs as salespeople could potentially be impacted in that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen it already because, again, the sales that I work in finance. So I get financing for businesses who are purchasing tech software and equipment and whatnot. Yep. And so we work as a direct lender and a broker. And with us, all of our syndicate sources, which is about 12 or 13 sources, have completely shut down funding. They are not funding anybody at all for anything, no matter the amount. So now we're the only ones that I know of funding, or other direct lenders are funding, but we're a grade A lender. So now all of those, 680, 675 credit scores who we would normally get syndicated somewhere, we can't get them financed at all. So even as salespeople, we've got goals that we have to hit, and it's a lot harder when we don't have the sources to get the customers approved that we normally would.
Right, exactly. So obviously I can't even say that it's a selfish fear because I think that it would have a huge impact. I'm just thinking in terms of our profession, right? But I think that it would have a huge impact really across the board, because if it's affecting industry and business, you're talking layoffs for companies with large manufacturing organizations. You know what I mean? Like all of those sort of things. So it's just, it's interesting, but it's also really concerning to your point about the media narrative and how we're so quick, even down here where the cases are almost as bad at this point as they were in the quote unquote, like, I think there was like a week span where the cases increased like, thousands a day. And like the spike for, I think between like, it was like March 8th. Well, it was between like March 8th and early April, there was like 35,000 confirmed cases. We're at like 23,000 now over the last like couple weeks. It's, the numbers are getting up there, at least in the South, I can say.
And keep in mind that does have, I mean, not all of it. There's certainly, I think, due to the carelessness and people kind of getting back to normal and not really paying attention to this as much anymore. That's certainly a factor. I think another factor is an increase in testing in general across states. Tests are becoming more and more available. at more and more locations for people, to see. I mean, I talked to a friend the other day who plans on going up to Maine one weekend, and Maine has been very strict about their policies and have basically said, at this point we're phasing into a reopening of the state. If you want to come, you need to show us a positive, or excuse me, a positive COVID test within a week before your travel. And they went and got the test without any issues. And I mean, a couple of months ago, that would have been unheard of because tests just weren't available to the mass population. So I think, the availability of tests definitely is a factor as well. But I completely agree with some of your takes there in terms of, it's a slippery slope in terms of, states reopening and taking care of small business owners who are kind of on the verge of losing everything. But also having to keep in mind that we do really need to do whatever we can to avoid another surge.
It would just be one of those things too, where, if we can't come up with the vaccine, if there was just a way to somehow get the UV light inside of us, you know what I mean, to help kill the coronavirus. Ben, I know you love that. That was from your boy, the Dawn.
Oh
if
my
we could
God.
just figure out a way to get the light inside to kill the virus, we'd be safe.
Yeah, Wayne, I don't know if you've seen the other episodes, but at least once Nick needs to pretend like I'm a Trump supporter to keep people coming and listening to see if there's any knockdown, drag out fights between us.
No, that's right. And all of our shows, at least once, I have to reference Len bias just to kind of rub it into Celtics fans.
There you go. That's fair.
Moving on, Wayne. Obviously, we did bring up the current state of protest here in the United States. Obviously, we went through the and I don't want to make it seem like it's over because it's still significant. The Ahmaud Arbery tragedy, then the George Floyd tragedy, and now we're dealing with people calling for justice for Breonna Taylor, the Rayshard Brooks situation that just took place. What are your thoughts on some of these situations in the aftermath? The looting and the looting versus the protesting, the situations in general. Was there a difference? Is this all about race? I know it's a big topic and a complicated question, but I do want to get your take on some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and it's very all encompassing of a lot of different things. And so one of the things, just touching on the race issue, I do believe that there is systemic racism, and I do believe that does trickle into our law enforcement's mindset that African American males in particular. I know that we've mentioned some females too, but males in particular are painted as a threat and glorified to be a threat sometimes through rap videos or whatnot to the younger generation. And, Tupac Shakur, if we're going back to like my generation of rappers, right? Younger folks don't know who that is probably. But, he had talked about, because it's not just black men, it's young white men too who are running into these situations. It's young people in general, who are coming up with this, lack of authority, or not lack of authority, was it they have an anti-authority personality, and it's glorified to do that. It's glorified to spit at cops and things like that, which I don't condone and I don't agree with. But at the same time, now we get into the second part of this, which is the overstepping of what the police are supposed to be doing. The police are supposed to be protecting the community. They're not supposed to be out there Judge Dredd, jury executioner. That's not their job. And I'd seen a great meme on Facebook. Somebody had said, I don't know who needs to be told this, but police aren't supposed to be shooting guilty people either. And I thought that was such a great meme that, that's not their job to shoot people. That's not their job. Your job to use lethal force is only if your life is threatened. So if somebody hits you with a fist in your face, like that's very disrespectful and you shouldn't do that to a police officer, but he still does not have the right to shoot you for it. He can arrest you, put you in handcuffs. And so there's, lack of training with the police. All you need is a high school diploma really to be a police officer and pass some physical tests, physical exams. So I think you should have to have a criminal justice degree to be a police officer. And I think you should have to go through training every single year, every 6 months on how to handle stressful situations. The military does it great. If you go into the Army, you're carrying a machine gun through very hostile territory, and you are told how to carry yourself. You're not out there just spraying. You're told how to carry yourself, even if you're confronted by people. And I think that the police need a similar type of training. So there's a problem with police. There is a problem with systemic racism. And this is one of those situations where it's two kind of tidal waves that just slammed into each other at the same time. And that's where we get this, everything that's going on now.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I kind of look for, obviously, is kind of in all of these tragedies and situations, is how is the media covering it? How are we looking at it as a society? And so specifically with the Rayshard Brooks situation, guy is stopped for basically the Wendy's that he was at, called the police on him because he was asleep in the parking lot. Cops showed up, questioned him, kind of established that he had been driving while intoxicated. It was obvious that they were going to arrest him. At that point, there's a scuffle. He ends up getting the taser from one of the police officers, shoots it at him, tries to run, and a police officer shoots him dead. I think one of the problems is that we need to establish consistencies with how things are reported and how the government looks at everything, whether that be local, federal, everything. Because I just read a story the other day where 6 officers were just fired in Atlanta for using their tasers on a group of college students who were being arrested for driving while intoxicated, refused to leave their cars. They used their tasers to get them out of the cars when they refused to get out, and they were fired because the DA in the area said that they were using deadly force. Now, you take this Rayshard Brooks situation in the same area, where if that logic is used consistently, then Rayshard Brooks used deadly force on one of these police officers before they turned around and shot him. I personally think that tasers, I would, in every situation, much rather a police officer use a taser if he's losing control of a situation rather than obviously pulling out his gun. I don't think using a taser is deadly force. But how much of the way the media and the way celebrities and kind of the way society looks at this situation, how much does that play into the kind of the over-analysis a lot of times into some of these situations that may or may not have to do with race?
Well, I think that there's a great book that, like you said, we talk on Facebook, and I love to debate people. And there's a great book out there. It's called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's a great book. It tells you basically how to use any sort of situation to your advantage. And like you said, the media can show whatever they want. There's 2 sides to a story, and most people only get to see one side of it. Now, it's not to say the media is lying. They're not. They are showing a portion of the story, but they aren't showing the complete story. And even when we think we have the complete story, there's several layers to that. So I think that definitely what people see, which most people, I'll be honest with you, aren't getting their news from Walter Cronkite anymore, and they're not getting it from the New York Times. They're getting it from 2 or 3 memes on Facebook or Instagram, and that's the news now. That's a fact. And I actually had somebody at work come up to me and say that his father-in-law, comes up to him with literally printouts of memes that he got off of Facebook. He prints them off and he says facts, and it's just that's what people think the news is. And I know, like, whenever I see something that seems questionable, I definitely research it to find out whether or not it's 100% accurate. And if it doesn't seem questionable, if it seems like it's accurate, then I research it twice as much, because the last thing I want to do is believe something just because I already believe it.
Yeah, and I respect that. I take a similar approach. Any position that I try to hold, or that I feel is true or accurate or objective, I try to find any position to pick that apart, almost to try to convince myself otherwise, because then I know if I can't be convinced otherwise, I try to go in with an open mind and that sort of thing. So I take I take that similar, but I do want to, Ben, I know you wanted to get onto the Rashard Brooks topic, but when I don't know if you saw the show last week, but I think that I alluded to the fact that I didn't follow the personally. Now, this is just me speaking for myself. I don't remember if Ben, if you agreed or not. I don't believe in 2020, even if we were in 2015, to be honest with you, I don't believe in the United States of America in 2020 that there is systemic racism. I think that there is racism in America. I don't think, I know that there's racism in America, but systemic racism would be an institutionalized event that is literally intact, partly used to keep a segment of the population down, right? Like that's what institutional racism is. So I wanted you to maybe like expand on that a little bit, I guess, like your feelings on the institutional racism piece, because I mean I just find this topic in particular fascinating.
Sure. Well, I don't think it's a level playing field. So start off with that. I do believe that we this is America. We all have the opportunity to achieve greatness, right, but the path is more difficult for other people. And I understand that everybody has their demons, right? Somebody's mom is a junkie or something. Everybody's got something. But the fact is, when you look at the lowest test scores in the country, they come out of, minority-based areas because they don't have access to the education that Caucasians have access to. When you look at the incarceration rate of minorities, it's 6 times that of Caucasians because they don't have access to the legal teams that Caucasians do. There's a system, like I said, systemic. There's a system that is preventing these, I guess, minorities from catching up to white America. And I hate, because I don't like the whole white privilege and white guilt things. I don't like those terms. Right. But I think that we are so far ahead of minorities in a lot of different areas. And that's why I support like the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, because and I don't like the whole all lives matter. And I'll tell you why. This is kind of where it goes to the systemic thing. We're already 8 steps ahead of them. Right. So in order for them to catch up, to get to that level playing field that we all agree doesn't exist, but in order for them to catch up, right, we have to stand still and they have to move forward. So when we say all lives matter, we're talking about all of us moving up at the same time, but then there's still 8 steps behind us. We have to allow minorities, African Americans, Hispanics to advance their culture while white people stay stagnant until we are all on the same level playing field, until all the school systems across the country are identical, until, all the opportunities available. We talk about sports. We were just talking about that earlier in the show. White general managers. There's 29 in football. There's like 1 black guy. Head coaches. I think there's 4 or 5. In a sport that's predominantly black. How is it possible that you could have 1,500 African Americans every single year in your league and only 3 of them end up becoming head coaches? There is a societal thing that I think keeps minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, down. And that's what I mean when I say systemic. I think that, it's preventing them from catching up to us.
Right. No. And that's what I think. So I guess the reason I asked you that question is because I think that people use that, like, racism in society. Right. And they use it synonymously with systemic racism. And I think like systemic racism was the 1960s and really into the 70s in this country. That was systemic racism, right? Like affirmative action, to your point on education, affirmative action where you could have somebody, a minority student, and we'll call it what it is. You could have a Hispanic or black student that has the same SAT scores, the same GPA as a white student in this country today. Even though the school district isn't as good, they have a leg up in getting into the same university over that white student, right? So the argument could be made, if education is the path forward in this country, which is what most people will say. I think it's bullshit, quite frankly, in some instances, right? Because if you also look at, we could talk about like the average income levels for people with a bachelor's degree, but that doesn't take into account the student loan debt, right? So they're just looking at those income levels, not debt to income ratio. But anyway, if you look at it from that standpoint, where you have these minority groups who can achieve essentially in those, I guess, less than school districts, my whole thing is it a cultural thing? Because that was the point that I made on the show with Ben last week. Like, do you think that culture plays a role? We talked about like the 58% of second generation West Indian immigrants having like 58% higher income levels than second, third generation folks who come from like, direct descendants of like the U.S. slavery, right? Do you think that there's a cultural component?
There is, but I think the cultural component is part of the systemic part of it, which is the sense that you look at what is allowed to be portrayed culturally, and it is more acceptable by white America for minorities to be portrayed as gangsters, rappers, athletes, right, who can't really, put together a sentence because they did a one and done year in college, and maybe that's brought onto themselves. But
Right.
then, you look at somebody like a Martin Luther King, silenced. Malcolm X, who was allowed to be as racist as he wanted to be, but as soon as he got the idea that we can all work together and achieve this, silenced. Somebody like Tupac Shakur, who I know was a rapper and kind of a gangbanger personality, but he was also kind of a philosopher, silenced. So I think that America does a good job of silencing African Americans who are great stand-up African Americans while promoting African Americans who seem unintelligent to make it more appealing to African Americans to be unintelligent.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can align with that. I can align with that train of thought for sure. Sorry, Ben, I jumped in on like the Rashard
No, that's fine. And I mean,
Brooks.
this was really the conversation I wanted to have, because listen, all of the stuff that's going on with the George Floyd, with Rayshard Brooks, with all of these individuals who are being killed by police officers, the whole point of the protests is to have these conversations about deeper issues, right? I mean, can we all agree that it's unlikely that police officers are white supremacists who just decided to sign up because they're given a gun and a badge and free license to kill black people? I don't think that's normally the case. I think there's definitely something deeper going on. There's definitely a reason for the higher levels of poverty in black communities, which can lead to higher levels of crime, lower levels of education and land and property, property and business ownership. I think all of that has an impact. And to Wayne's point, and I have had this conversation recently. I think the systemic racism, the definition that a lot of people want to use, I agree with you, Nick. I don't think that necessarily exists. It's like one of those things. Find me a law on the books that is inherently racist,
Right.
and you can't, because that's illegal at this point.
Right.
But there are some historical factors that have informed and impacted the culture, right? And that culture is part of the historical struggles that people has gone through, and therefore, therefore, when we talk about culture and its impact on why certain things are happening to the black community, that definitely has to be brought up.
Right.
And it's an evolution of racism in general. Like we talk about, you say, well, systemic racism, in the civil rights movement, that was one thing because we had laws put in place to prevent, African Americans from coming up. But I would say this, we all agree that racism still exists, that there are racists out there, but they just aren't freely using the N-word. They aren't going out and attacking people because they're more cautious about it. Their racism has evolved to be more secretive. I think systemic racism still exists. It's just a little bit more evolved and secretive. It's not out in your face like laws would be.
Yeah, I see what you're. I think a lot of people, honestly, Wayne, I think that a majority of people feel the same way you do in this country. I would say, I mean, it's obvious by what you see on the news. I don't disagree with it either. I think my whole thing, I do think that it's very easy to take some of these events, like we talked about George Floyd, we talk about Breonna Taylor, we talk about Rayshard Brooks, and like lump them and categorize them into one topical line item, if you will, right? It's easy to do that. The Rayshard Brooks thing, I'm watching. It's completely different from George Floyd, first and foremost. It's completely different, night and day different from Breonna Taylor. I think that I watched this event take place, and I think when I'm watching this video, and Atlanta's 5-hour drive from where I'm sitting right now, I'm watching this video take place in this Wendy's parking lot, and my first sort of like thought is, these cops, when they're chasing after him, they are embarrassed because this drunk individual who is clearly intoxicated, he didn't pass the field sobriety test, this drunk individual out wrestled the two of them, grabbed a taser from one of them, and then ran off and attempted to shoot one of those officers with the taser. And I'm not saying that individual necessarily. I mean, he committed multiple felonies, right? Like, Rayshard Brooks committed multiple felonies. It's unequivocal, or it's undeniable, is what I should say. But I think that those cops, there was no justification to shoot him. There was zero justification to shoot him in his back as he's running away. You have his ID, you have his vehicle, he's inebriated, and you're just embarrassed because he embarrassed you. I mean, he out wrestled two cops, and I think police in this country are so poorly trained in general. Not all cops, right? But I think that the generalized training for police officers in this country is so poor that it doesn't promote, to your point, that Army type training. Right? Where when that fight or flight response kicks in, you're ready to roll. It's almost like you see these police officers, and I think the George Floyd case was very similar. I don't think Derek Chauvin was trying to kill George Floyd. I think Derek Chauvin's ego got in the way, and he felt like a big, strong individual on top of this big, strong individual, and never thought once in his head that he could potentially kill him. I mean, do you think that that's fair?
Yeah, well, like I said, the whole thing was just a combination of factors. We do have lack of police training as one thing. Like I said, I do believe that in systemic racism, like I mentioned, and I think that the fact that this poor police training has been videotaped and, put onto minorities has brought that, discussion to the forefront. I mean, every powder keg needs the spark, and I'm not saying that, police in general, like you said, I'm not saying police in general are targeting African Americans. That's not the powder keg. The powder keg is the systemic racism that I believe exists. The spark was just these police mistrainings that, ended up, unfortunately, with people dying.
Yeah. And I think, for me, the spark was the celeb culture, the media narrative, all those things you talk about where people get their information on Facebook or whatever, what have you. Everything's at the just whip out your phone and you can record anything, right? Nowadays, I think that the narrative was I think that was the spark. I think that there was an idea to set out this narrative, and it worked. And since pretty much 2014, where the Michael Brown thing happened in Ferguson, it's been working.
Well, again, it's I mean, and here's the thing. One of the things we're going to need to get past is the sensational aspect of the media narrative, right? Because I've seen multiple people when the four officers were arrested for the George Floyd situation, I saw multiple people post 4 killers in custody, only a few thousand left to go. Between 200 and 250 Black people are killed by police officers, and I don't want to belittle that number, but that's an annual number. Right. So to believe in 2020 that there's thousands of police officers out there that are just reckless abandon killing Black individuals just isn't true. It's not statistically accurate. And so again, there are kind of extreme media narratives that are being pushed as part of this powder keg that we need to get past that sensational aspect of the narrative first, so that we can analyze things objectively, and have real conversations like this about what needs to change to address what really does appear to be in some ways very systemic, if not at least historical.
Right. Yeah, for sure. We could probably continue our show from last week on this topic, Wayne. As you can imagine, it's just it's very gripping, right? Because everybody has it evokes such an emotional response from so many people. I mean, Ben and myself included. I catch myself all the time reading something on social media. I'm sure this happens with you with sports as well, right? It's you read something and you're just like, you want to jump down somebody's throat about what you just read or what you just heard. But yeah, we could probably drone on here, but I know that we gotta move it on to to kind of the next topic.
We'll move on to something a little bit more fun and a little bit more comical, less serious. Wayne, I don't know if you've been following any of this stuff on the autonomous zones in Seattle, Washington, and then in Nashville, Tennessee. I find it funny that basically a large group of radical progressives who are probably against things like closing the borders, a border wall, stop and frisk, created a little community with basically they basically took over 6 blocks in Seattle, and the first thing they did was set up a border fence, put armed guards there to patrol, and then stopped and frisked everybody who wanted to come in. I find it a little bit hilarious, and so I do want to get your thoughts on what you think about basically these individuals who have done this. And then I do want you to think about this too, because I've always been interested in some of your takes on the way to fix things. What would your ideal community/country look like if you had to make some general rules? What would that look like in today's world?
Wayne's utopia.
Wayne,
what is
exactly.
Wayne's utopia?
Yeah, it would not be a utopia for everybody. But I would get into that. But yeah, no, when I first started watching the whole Seattle thing and the Nashville thing, I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was it reminded me of the episode of Family Guy where Peter creates Pretoria, and he secedes from the United States, and then he takes over Joe's pool, and they end up taking the land back from him. But so that was comical to me in that sense. But the more I started actually reading into this whole thing, I actually thought, what a wonderful way to protest, in a way that it has sparked conversation. And it has, I mean, in Seattle in particular, I know the mayor's gone down there. She has people going down there, like meeting with them, asking them, how are things going? What are you guys looking to achieve out of this? And there's a conversation being had. Now, in Nashville, the governor went a completely different route, and he was like, autonomous zones will not be tolerated in this state, which is great that the state troopers just watched these people set up their tents and didn't do anything about it. But it's such a wonderful way to protest because it is peaceful, and I understand you're taking over a block or several blocks, and this area that they've taken over was already kind of a progressive area anyway, so it isn't like they've taken over some suburb and then converted it into like some progressive. This is kind of what it was already.
It is Seattle.
Yeah. So but I thought it was such a great idea to negotiate, because they're basically negotiating with government on how they want to move forward. And that could be, and this isn't the first time it's ever happened in Seattle either. I mean, they've had people that took over school buildings and converted them into museums. They've had people that took over, abandoned buildings and just turned them into other things. And they all had a plan. This was kind of unplanned, which is kind of like, it's a little weird, but they're able to kind of voice their opinion. And the mayor's listening. They're like, what do you want to do? Well, we don't want the police station here. Okay, well, how do you want to govern? Obviously, you guys have armed guards here. So you do believe in having protection. If you don't want a police station here, what would you like? And a conversation is being had rather than just sending in the National Guard or the police force to start bashing heads and then clean up the area and open it up again. So right. I do love seeing what's happening here with almost like a collective bargaining amongst, different types of people.
Yeah, they're handling it better than Major League Baseball, I would say, in terms of their negotiation tactics. That's my feeling on it. I'm looking at the MLB negotiation between the players and the ownership, and I'm like, boy, these people in Seattle could teach them a thing or two. And it's rare that you would associate Seattle with being any sort of productive influence on baseball, right? That's a big knock to Mariners fans, but I wanted to at least put that out there. But so Wayne, what would your ideal utopian, if you could, Laconia, let's say you annex Laconia and turn it into Wayne's utopia, what would that look like?
It's so difficult because I'm a realist at heart. So I know that human beings are just sophisticated animals. So the idea that you would have the right mixture of animals in your cage, it's probably not going to happen. But I mean, I would love a world, wouldn't we all love a world where, we all look out for each other? And, like Seattle's talking about with this whole annex thing, right? We don't need the police. We'll police ourselves. We'll look out for each other. If we see something happening we don't like, a group of people will go and stop that. We are going to try to develop a society, which is what we really should be doing. We shouldn't need people with guns and batons to keep us in check. We should just know how to be good human beings. So when I think of a utopia, I think of more how people think, more so than laws to put in place. But if we're going that route with just hard concrete laws, like I said, not everyone would like my utopia because I am extremely right-wing, hardcore crime and punishment. And so I am, I am very much like, in Ecuador, huge proponent of this. In Ecuador, the first time you blow that you're drunk while driving, you're executed on the side of the road. No court case.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm in favor of that. And, I am in favor of, execution for, pedophiles and rapists. I think they shouldn't get jail time. They should be executed. Why clog up the jails? Just execute these people. I'm big on executions, and
yeah. So there'd be a lot of public displays, like public hangings and executions.
Well, we'll bring back the guillotine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, Wayne, I do not want to step out of line in your utopia.
I
gotta tell you that right now.
I don't know if I live there.
Yeah, you're saying to the guy with his head in the guillotine, you're like, isn't this great?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, watch my back. That's all that's going to be left. No, that's good. Ben, do you have I'm curious now. I want to know what Ben's utopia looks like.
My utopia?
Yeah, what is your utopia? It's not fair to ask Wayne and then not have.
See, I'm not. I'm one of those individuals that, for the most part, I just like to mind my own business and like everybody else to mind theirs. So it's like one of those things where, if as long as you're not doing anything that puts anybody else in immediate danger, things like any kind of drug use, as long as you're not going to be operating a motor vehicle or like forcing somebody else to do it, like, why not just let everybody, smoke crack? What's the harm?
So kind of like Seattle right now.
kind of like Seattle. I mean, I'm not one of those, like, I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna say, like, in my negotiations for this utopia that, like, anybody who has been arrested on marijuana or resisting arrest related offenses be just, like, let out of jail all at the same time and have their records expunged. But certainly, because certain people might have to be grandfathered depending on the charges. But I mean, moving forward, it's like drugs, prostitution, drinking. I mean, just let everybody do what they want to do, man.
Yeah, that's
it's tax revenue. It's tax revenue at the end of the day,
It is. I'll tell you what. They better not cross paths to Wayne's utopia. There'd be a lot of executions. You guys, I can see a war happening between the two utopias.
No, actually,
hold on a minute, Wayne. How do you feel about guns' rights in your utopia? Because we all know. We all know that everyone in my utopia is allowed to have a firearm.
Everyone's packing in Ben's utopia.
Right. I don't care. Whatever they want to, 50 cals, it's fine.
So my stance on gun control, actually getting into that, is that, and I've softened a lot since I was younger, but my stance has always been, I'm very pro Second Amendment. I believe if you are not a felon and you don't pose a threat to anybody and you want to purchase a firearm, you should be allowed to purchase a firearm. But I do believe that, like all privileges, which I don't consider the Second Amendment a right, it's a privilege. Right. Like all privileges, they need to be policed and they need to be held in check. We have freedom of speech, but we can't yell fire in a movie theater. We have, peaceful assembly, but we can't have a peaceful assembly of adults in the women's bathroom. I know that's a whole other topic, but you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like, there are regulations on every single law and every single privilege. To me, owning a firearm is a privilege. And as long as you don't abuse that privilege, I'm okay with you having one. But I do believe that we need strict regulations. And I do believe that the minute you abuse that privilege and it's discovered, and I mean something, because like I said, I'm hardcore, crime and punishment.
Yeah.
As soon as it's discovered that maybe you let your kid play with it or something like that, if that's on video or there's some actual evidence that you did that, you now have lost your Second Amendment privilege. You can never own a gun for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I've always been a proponent of stuff like that. Even with if you have, and obviously it's a case by case basis, right? Like it needs to go in front of a judge. You can't just I'm not a big immediate confiscation type of person, but certainly if somebody gets called that they were a domestic abuse call, and they that they're a gun owner because they're on the National Registry or whatever. Certainly especially if there is evidence that is what happened. I agree with any petty crime or serious crime that should, even if you aren't convicted, that should be a factor in in at least temporarily or maybe permanently taking a person's rights away. You need to be an upstanding and responsible citizen because you do have a what could be categorized as a killing machine, in your possession. So definitely agree on that.
So you guys got some great utopian ideas. You put Seattle. I'll tell you what. There'd be more media coverage in both of your utopias than there's been in Seattle. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
Like I was saying that I agree with Ben in a sense that you're saying with our utopias that they would clash, but not really, because my whole thing with crime and punishment is I'm not saying it would be a crime to have alcohol or drugs. I agree with Ben that should be illegal because one of the deeper conversations I have with people, which people who aren't open-minded go nuts when I say this, but when it comes to morality, I don't believe there's a such thing as right or wrong. There's only our perceptions of what's right or wrong, and that's determined by a mob mentality. So I don't want to be a moral police. I just want to be like Ben saying, if you're infringing on other people's right to live peacefully, that's when you get the guillotine,
Right. I like that.
But if you're doing your own thing, you're not hurting anybody, have fun.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I can run as your vice president then, Wayne. Maybe we can just combine our two utopias and, get things started.
Wow. Look at this. Coexisting. We're crossing party lines here in the
creating a nation.
Yeah. That's amazing. I just want the ability to trade states. That's all. Trade, I want to be able to trade a place like Florida for a place like Spain, just be like, hey, Europe, let me get that and you can have this, and all the real estate in the swamp. No offense to Florida. I just wanted to use that as an example.
Well, I would think Europe views all of the United States as players to be named later.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I would agree with that too. Ben, you want me to jump into the next one? It's even lighter than our utopia.
It's all you.
Ideas so Wayne, this is right up your alley, really. Ideas for an effective sports relaunch. And I want to emphasize, I read today that Fauci said NFL needs to play in a bubble, almost mirroring what the NBA is doing and playing in a neutral site, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, Dr. Fauci came out and said that today. What's your take on that? But then how do you think that a relaunch should happen with all sports? I mean, baseball aside, because it's such a mess.
Well, I think that they're doing a good job right now and kind of coming up with a plan. Adam Silver might be one of the best commissioners in the history of sports in terms of how he handles situations. And I think he's done a great job with this. He's very player friendly, unlike Manfred. And I think that launching the NBA the way he has, I understand what he's saying. You're going into this bubble. You're going to be there for 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever it is, right? Nobody's allowed in. And that's the right way to do it. I'm actually excited to see NBA games with no fans, basically just like pickup games essentially, but where they count. Because I mentioned this before, if you play basketball your entire life like I have, playing in front of a crowd is fun. And I've played in front of a crowd and they get ruckus and it's awesome to hit a three-pointer and everybody jumps up out of their seats. But playing on the street when there are no fans is so much more intense. And I think that these games with no fans, where it's just straight up, heart and winning, it's not trying to impress the fans. It's not flexing after dunks, which you're not going to see anybody do anymore. It's just going to be playing to win. These are going to be the most intense games we've ever seen in the NBA. So I'm looking forward to those games without fans. As far as the NFL, I saw somebody had shown like a redesigned helmet that has like a mask in it. And that's kind of interesting. But, as long as the NFL comes back, that's all I care about. I don't care how they come back. I want the NFL back so badly. If we lost the NFL season, I'd be devastated.
Yeah, that's I like your point too about the NBA with like no fans and sports and no fans. So it's gonna be weird for me. I'm a huge, as I mentioned, I'm a huge. I'm not. I can't say that I'm like a soccer fan, right? Because like I pretty much only watch Liverpool Football Club. It's like the only team that I follow, the only team that I watch, and they're opening back up this weekend. And to see them with no fan, it's gonna be really weird for soccer because the environment that it creates, right? And I think soccer is one of those sports too where like teams thrive on certain venues, if you will, like certain fanfare. There's almost like you're nullifying a lot of team, and I would put Liverpool in that category. You're nullifying some team's ability to get up for it by not having fans. And I think to your point, in the NBA, it's really not like that. And Magic Johnson alluded to, I think, during the Jordan documentaries, right? Didn't Magic Johnson say that that game that they had with the Dream Team, the inter squad game with the Dream Team, was like one of the most competitive games he's ever played in his life?
Yeah,
And there was empty gym.
yeah, it's pick up basketball, and like I said, it's all about winning. It's all about what's the final score. Like there's
Right.
there's nobody to impress. There's nobody to get your emotions up. The only thing that gets your emotions up is actually winning, and you get to find out who's actually a player. I think, like you're saying, in soccer, I think football is the same thing. When teams go to play Arrowhead Stadium with the Chiefs, and there's no fans in there making the whole stadium shake, and I think it's going to give other teams an advantage they didn't have before. But at the end of the day, I still think the better team is going to end up winning. And to your point where you said, what do I want it to look like when it comes back? I do want it to be without fans because I am still concerned with the COVID thing. And as soon as we start opening up sporting events, it was just like we had these crazy rules in New Hampshire. I think it was came out and said you can't have gatherings of more than 12 people, but you can have protests of more than 100 or around 100.
Right.
So we're like, oh, well, I'll have a protest in my backyard with a barbecue. It's just every yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the same
As
thing
long as there are signs hanging around, I mean,
Same thing with
what's the classification?
if you start letting people go back to the stadiums, then what's really to stop people from just kind of going out and doing whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I haven't followed the NBA sort of reopening strategy. I know that it's going to be like a consolidated. There's going to be like play-in games. It's almost going to be like March Madness style. But will the seeding be the same? Like, would the Lakers still play the 8th seed in these scenarios? Is that like how it works in the West?
Yeah, so there was talk, and I actually liked the idea of a 1 through 16 tournament with no conferences. So you would have the East and the West intermingling in those first and second rounds, just the top 16 teams, which is how it should be, by the way. I hate seeing a team go 45 and 37 and miss the playoffs, while a team goes 37 and 45 in the East and gets a 7 seed. So I like seeing the top 16 seeds, but I guess they scrapped the idea. The play-in games are all more like teams within 6 games of that 8th seed are going to have an opportunity to try to get that 8 seed, and then they're going to do 1 through 8 seeding like they have in the past. Now, the reason they did 6 games, this is my conspiracy theory, to get Zion Williamson into the playoffs because people want to see him.
Oh.
What seed's New Orleans?
New Orleans is not a seed. They are 6 games out of 8th, which is why I was saying if it was 4 games out of 8th, we don't get to see Zion. So the reason they had 6 games out of 8th was so that the world could get to see the New Orleans Pelicans.
Well, I got bad news for everybody because if Memphis holds on to that 8th seed, I'll tell you what, Wayne, you don't want the Lakers to play Ja Morant in a no Staples Center, nothing like that. And I mean, I'm telling you, Ja's the truth. You want a gamer, a guy who's got a chip on his shoulder and always plays like he's got something to prove? Watch out for Ja. Lakers could be out early.
I'll take LeBron James and Anthony Davis over anybody in the NBA. Anybody.
I mean, I don't know. Anthony Davis is always like, one injury away from his season being over. It feels like. And LeBron, he's in the West now, so he's out there with the big boys. We'll see what happens because he doesn't have those 30-win East teams making the 6th seed anymore that he can beat up on in the first few rounds. That was an insult to the Lakers and to Ben. So, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Kobe Bryant guy, right? Like, I just can't stand LeBron. I hate LeBron went to the Lakers.
Yeah,
because I feel like it tarnishes kind of the lore of the Lakers to an extent, like because I just wanted there to be a person to carry on the legacy of Kobe Bryant already established in LA. LeBron's not that guy, in my opinion. That's how I feel.
Well, that guy's not in the NBA. That's why that's why the Lakers don't have him. I mean, LeBron James is the biggest name in basketball, the biggest name in sports, arguably. And I don't like his personality in terms of basketball. And this is the hard thing I have with LeBron is I feel like every time he opens his mouth at a gym with cameras around him, he says something that makes me want to punch him in the face, But this is also a guy who set up a school for inner city youth in Cleveland, who's setting up this, to keep voter suppression from not happening. He's a great activist, and he seems like he's a really nice guy. But as a basketball player mentally, I think that he's confused about whether or not he wants people to like him or whether or not he wants to win. And he's so.
I think it is his public persona in basketball. I think as a basketball player, I think if you listen to some of his press conferences post game, the guy's a genius. I mean, the guy has a
genius. You're gonna call LeBron James a genius,
dude. I mean, he has a photographic memory of he can go through a whole game in his head and say exactly what happened.
There's a lot of guys that can do that. Are you kidding me? You call LeBron James a genius? Kobe Bryant would probably tell you every free throw he ever missed. Are you kidding me?
Well, there's different types of genius. I think Dennis Rodman was a genius. I think that. It's just genius in different ways.
LeBron James a genius, Ben. I hope we get Mears on this show and you give that take.
I mean, I'll be ready. I'll be ready for it at that point. I'm not gonna extend this show by half an hour to defend LeBron James. But again, I mean, I'm a fan. I do think he's a genius of basketball. I think he's the best all around player since Magic Johnson. We'll move on. Wayne, we are now entering our rapid fire round. These are just random questions off the top. We ask you can answer them quickly without a lot of context, or you're certainly able to elaborate. We may prompt you to if we disagree with the answers. But Nick, why don't you get us started?
All right, so rapid fire round, Wayne. I'm going to give you a softball because if you watched the show last week, that's the only kind of questions I give, according to Ben. So, best band all time in your opinion?
Beatles.
That I love. See, I'm a Wayne guy now. I'm a Wayne guy.
Now,
Nick,
Nick,
hesitate. Wayne didn't hesitate. There was no hesitation. I said best band all time. He goes Beatles. Boom. That's it. Wayne, I like that.
Do we remember what Dan answered? Because I know Adam and I both said Led Zeppelin. You and Wayne have now said Beatles.
Dan said Queen.
Dan said Queen. Okay, so I'm just keeping track because this is the one question that we're basically asking everyone.
Yep.
I think it's an interesting question because there are a lot of, Nick will say there's no other answer, but
there are a lot of variables. I mean, let's face it. McCartney and Lennon were not as good as songwriters as Simon and Garfunkel. So they were lacking in that area. I mean, they aren't as good of performers as Queen. They weren't as good vocally as some of these other bands. But in terms of looking at a juggernaut that just, completely changed and revolutionized music as we know it, and even Led Zeppelin has taken from the Beatles. I mean, they are Michael Jordan. They're the best.
Right.
Fair enough.
I have nothing to add. Wayne took it all.
Next one, because I got a little bit of flack for my answer, so I wanted to ask this question to somebody who might think about it a little bit more and give a more interesting answer. Last week, Nick asked me who my favorite president was
in your lifetime.
In my lifetime. What would your answer be?
So, what's difficult about this is it's more retrospective, right? Because in my lifetime, I think I've had 8 presidents, 6, whatever it is. I don't even really count backwards, but. The reality is, I think that the guys who were president when I was younger, and I didn't appreciate when I was younger, now that I'm an adult, I kind of look back and I appreciate them more. I am a big Bill Clinton fan.
Oh, man, you lost me lost me with the Beatles thing, and you go to Bill Clinton, and now it's just wow, Wayne.
I love some of the ideas that he had. Again, in retrospect, I like the idea of heavy taxes. I like the idea of shrinking the budget and having a surplus of money. He's not a war guy. Most left-wing people aren't pro-war, so I like that about him. He's a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, he's a highly, highly intelligent guy. I mean, we can say whatever he wants about morality. I just said morals don't exist, so whatever.
Right.
So in terms of actually presidency, I think here's the thing is I didn't like Obama, right? And I had this discussion today with my wife. I didn't like him as a president in terms of his policies and what he stood for because I believe he got extremely left-wing in the second term that he took over.
Oh, yeah.
But I liked that he was presidential. He's the anti-Trump in terms of how he speaks and how deliberate he is and how knowledgeable he is and how researched he is when he goes to the podium. So he was very professional. He seemed presidential, but I didn't like his policies. So Reagan, is just, so far back. I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, and so I don't really see that whole trickle down economics. I didn't really see it happen and take effect. So in my lifetime, I didn't like Bush because he was a warmonger. I didn't like his son because I felt like he was similar and he's kind of a moron. I didn't like, I don't like Trump because I think he's worse than Bush. He makes Bush sound like a Rhodes Scholar. Obama, like I said, was just extreme left wing. I didn't like that. So really, out of all of my lifetime, it's basically Clinton is the only one who I felt like wasn't, obscenely,
Fair enough.
Wow, wow, Wayne, you went with probably my least favorite president, and you also simultaneously bashed Ben's favorite president, who's Donald Trump. So it's I mean, who'd have thought?
Moving on.
Oh yeah, is this me here? Yeah, this is me.
It is. Yeah.
All right, so Wayne, you already alluded to this, so I'm gonna put this is gonna be a 2-part question because you already kind of said this. Your opinion, best basketball player of all time.
Wilt Chamberlain.
Real? Okay. I thought you were going to say Jordan because you just said.
Well, because Jordan
is the Michael Jordan.
Right, because Jordan is the popular answer. But in reality, when it comes to sports, I put a lot of stock into domination, right? And nobody in the history of the game dominated like Wilt did. Nobody. And so when you look at, Wayne Gretzky in hockey, right? If Wayne Gretzky scores 0 goals for his career, he's the leading point scorer in NHL. Oh, and he has more goals than anybody in the history of the NHL. So that's domination. You look at Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth hit as many home runs in a season as the rest of the American League combined. That's domination.
Right.
Wilt Chamberlain, when you look at the leading points per game for one season, Wilt Chamberlain is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th. When you look at here's a great statistics: 30-30 games, 30 points, 30 rebounds in the same game. Only 4 people in history have ever done it. Kevin Love had a 30-30 game. Dwight Howard had a 30-30 game. Bill Russell had 3 30-30 games. Wilt Chamberlain had 126. When you look at 50-point games, Michael Jordan's second with like 81 50-point games. Yeah. Wilt Chamberlain has over 200. And the fact that he averaged over 40 minutes a game for his career. How about this one? 13 years in the NBA, never fouled out of a game in his career.
No, those stats are impressive. I just always look at the fact that, look, he played against like 6 teams, and the starting 5 on those 6 teams were like all white guys with an average height of like, what, 6'2"? I mean, that has to be taken into consideration, I think.
Well, the average center back then was 6'10", and there were several teams who had 7-footers on their team. The fact that Wilt Chamberlain dominated was more not because of his height, because if it was all about height, then why didn't Yao Ming average 50 and 30?
I couldn't say healthy. Yao couldn't say healthy.
He couldn't have averaged 50 if he even stayed healthy. So it's not just height. It's the fact that Wilt Chamberlain ran 100 meters in 11 and a half seconds. It's the fact that Wilt Chamberlain had a 43-inch vertical and he was 7'2". The fact that he could bench press 435 pounds. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger said he's the strongest person he's ever lifted weights with. So he was basically a 2020 athlete in 1960. And that's why he dominated. It wasn't his height. It was just the overall athletic package.
All right. So I was going to ask you, my follow-up question was going to be, who's the best player you've seen over the last 20 years? But I'm going to expand that timeline. And I want to say, who's the best player you've seen in your lifetime? Because you said Wilt's the best player of all time. So I want to know who's the best you've seen in your lifetime. Because I think that's a more fair assessment, right? Because you didn't watch Wilt.
Right. So this one, it's Michael Jordan, because to me, I have Wilt 1, Michael Jordan 2. So so Jordan's the second best player of all time, in my opinion. LeBron is number 3. And I don't think it's obscene to say, is he better than Jordan? I understand the argument there. I don't think he is, but I understand. I think the case can be made that's legitimate. And so I think that those are the 2 best players I've seen in my lifetime. I have Kareem 4. I didn't really get a chance to see him play. And I have Kobe Bryant as the 5th best player of all time.
Wow. So you don't even have Magic Johnson in your 5th best.
Him and Bird are kind of 6, 7-ish area. I don't have Bill Russell in my top 10.
LeBron James, Ben, I already know who you. The LeBron James fandom on this segment of our show has been just it makes me want to throw up. I mean, it's just, this is a man who ruined the game of basketball the way we know it.
We do get back to basketball questions, so I won't linger on this one. Wayne, you had a podcast called Recasted that I absolutely love. So I'm going to give you the opportunity here to flex your film knowledge and your love of film. What's one movie that you would like to see rebooted, and who would you cast for the main roles?
Whew. I mean, that's a tough one. I don't know to see rebooted because it would have to be something that isn't iconic, right? Because you don't want to see iconic movies rebooted. They're good just the way they are. But it has to be a movie that you enjoyed. It has to be something you say, wow, that was pretty good. You know, maybe something they could do was better special effects today. Oh boy. I really am having a hard time with this one. I know like it would have to be something special effects driven because obviously early special effects were junk.
Well, what about I remember you talking about what about a movie like Armageddon, for instance?
Hey, you're leading, Ben. You can't do that. He has to make the decision.
I'm just saying something on that, you know, on that level where the special effects obviously could be way better now than they were back when that movie was.
Yeah, in the show Recasted, I want to say Armageddon was like episode 5 or episode 6. We did actually recast Armageddon, and I recasted Denzel Washington as Harry Stamper.
I like that.
And I had recasted Channing Tatum as the Ben Affleck character, AJ.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I like that.
Nice.
I like that.
Yeah, so I think the one movie, if you talk about, like, not so much of a reboot, but you know how Disney's kind of coming out with their live action movies now?
Yeah.
You know, taking the cartoons. I had talked about doing kind of almost like a darker, in a way, but a more serious Hercules. And I was thinking, you know, if you had Chris Hemsworth as Hercules, I think he obviously looks the part.
Yep.
Alexandria Daddario as Meg. I think she's got those that dark hair and the eyes and everything. She's perfect.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
For Hades, so this is where it gets a little bit darker, right? Is that James Woods as the Hades character was kind of comical because it's a kids movie, it's a cartoon.
Yeah.
But taking it to a little bit darker place, I wanted to see Hades portrayed by Javier Bardem.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. I like the Hercules. I'm surprised Disney hasn't been putting forth the Hercules idea.
I think it's coming.
Yeah, I think it's been done like in different iterations recently, so they're probably waiting a year or two. You know, you had that Hercules movie with The Rock, and then another one with one of the dudes from like Twilight or something like that. But a reboot of the Disney version would be would be cool.
All right, Ben, you got this next question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask it because I know you'll probably have a lot to say depending on the answer, Nick. Wayne, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2020. What is your record prediction for them?
So this is where it's going to be interesting, right? I'm going to give them the same record as the Patriots, 11-5.
So they're going. Wait, they were 7-9 last year, right? Is that right? They were 7-9 last year.
Sure.
And they're going to 11-5 this year.
Correct. I like what they did in the draft in terms of addressing their defensive needs. I think that getting Grant Delpit was almost like a steal of the draft because he was the best safety in the draft, and they really needed some safety help. So that's something that's going to help them over the top. And that's not even talking about they only added the greatest quarterback of all time to their roster. Whoa. And you know, they drafted Tristan Wirfs. They've got a strong offensive line that's going to give him time to throw, which he didn't have in New England. And when you give Tom Brady time to throw, he can pick apart the Bears' defense with Lawrence Taylor if you want to. I mean, just there's no defense he can't shred if he has time to throw. And he's going to have that. And he's going to have weapons to throw too.
Well, I think you're also looking at it from the sense. I'm not even gonna jump into my take on this, Ben, as much as I know you want me to. I think that you're looking at it in the sense that, like, oh, well, Brady's going to have all these things that he didn't have in New England. But you know what he did have in New England was Belichick. And the reality of the situation is Tom Brady doesn't throw the football over 20 yards. And I cannot see a guy like Mike Evans or Chris Godwin running these 6-7 yard slant routes where Brady's just going to be pinging them left and right. I just can't see it happening. These are vertical receivers, and Brady doesn't have the arm. I mean, let's call a spade a spade.
I agree with it. I've always called Brady, or not always, but recently Brady's been noodle arm Brady. Like you said, you know, when he throws a pass over 35 yards, his shoulders tilt at a 45-degree angle and he's launching it. But guess what? Mike Evans is 6'6" and he's got a 40-inch vertical. So that's a guy that you can actually launch it up there, and he can beat those 5'11" receivers. You can't do that when you have Brandon Cooks, who's 5'9", is running your deep threat. He's got a big receiver that can run deep. Godwin's fast. He's more of the deep threat than Evans. Evans is really more of a possession receiver. He's a kind of a catch the ball 12, 15 yards out receiver. That's going to fit Brady just fine. I think the thing that's going to hurt him is he doesn't really have a running game back there, and a lot of his passes are predicated on play action. So.
Yeah. No, I think, I think Brady without Belichick is going to be a huge wake-up call. I think Brady should have called it quits after that Rams Super Bowl. That's my take.
We'll see.
Yeah, 11-5 though is the take. Wait a second, I can't even ask Wayne this next question because we already kind of We already kind of, we already.
Well, I mean, ask it anyway because it might be a different answer. There are different factors.
My next question, Wayne, or the next question we had for you was who do you think is the greatest Laker of all time? And the reason I asked you this question is because, I think, and Magic Johnson persuaded me that the greatest Laker of all time is Kobe Bryant. And this was before Kobe Bryant died.
Yes, so I agree with Magic that Kobe Bryant is the greatest Laker of all time. However, he's not the greatest player to wear a Lakers jersey of all time. That is LeBron James. So LeBron obviously hasn't had the Lakers career that Kobe had. He was there his entire career. And what he achieved is phenomenal. I mean, 81 points per game. His defense, I think it was 14-time all-defense, 18-time all-star. I mean, He is the greatest Laker that ever played a game of basketball. Yeah. However, like I said, if you're talking about just anybody who wore the jersey for a season or two, LeBron James I have ahead of Kobe Bryant all time. So that means that LeBron James is technically Wilt Chamberlain would be the greatest player ever to wear a Lakers jersey because I have him as my number one player of all time.
Yeah. How many rings do you think Kobe and D-Wade and Bosh would have won together?
I don't think they complement each other's styles very well. LeBron James is a distributor, so he fits well with guys who can score. Kobe Bryant, if you put him with a Dwayne Wade, who's also a ball-dominant scoring guard, I think those two end up in a fist fight every other practice. So Kobe needs to be surrounded by guys. Him and Bosh would be great together. But he needs to be surrounded by guys who will defer to him for starters. And he needs to play with guys who are willing to pour their heart onto the floor. I think Bosh did. I think people don't realize how hard he played. Right. My ultimate dream team, I call it like the all-heart team, is Allen Iverson, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and Shaquille O'Neal. And I thought, man, so when you talk about like how would he win with Wade and Bosh, I don't care about that. If you put Kobe and Kevin Garnett for his prime, I think Kobe has 7.
Yeah, I'd agree. I love the Kevin Garnett shout too because I'm a big Kevin Garnett guy myself. Ben, you got the next one.
Yeah, Wayne. So going back to your love of film, what's a movie that everyone raves about that you feel is overrated? I feel like every lover of film has kind of a feeling on this about a certain film specifically.
I could fill up an entire porcelain toilet bowl with vomit thinking about Pulp Fiction.
Wow, that's a really good take. Yeah, I like that take.
Yeah, I don't like anything Tarantino does for the most part. I will say that his more recent stuff where he's kind of tried to intertwine history with like a fictional story, I liked Inglourious Basterds, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Django Unchained was a little over the top for me, but it was okay. I didn't mind it. I actually really liked Christoph Waltz, and that was phenomenal. Leonardo DiCaprio was outstanding in his role as the slave owner guy. So good. But the movie itself, it was give or take. I liked Inglourious Basterds. I actually liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's kind of a drag. It's a bore kind of movie, but it was interesting anyways. But when you look at Tarantino stuff like Dusk Till Dawn and like whatever else, what are some of the Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, Reservoir Dogs? Crap. They're all crap to me. You can throw them all in the toilet.
Wow, I respect that because you hear Pulp Fiction come up a lot. People like that movie, and I was never a fan either. I'm with Wayne on that one. You lost me at the Brady LeBron thing, but you had me at Pulp Fiction and the Beatles. I'll tell you that. So the last one, Wayne. Who would you like to see as president? This could be somebody. I mean, at this point, I guess that question is kind of something where you don't need to talk about a political up-and-comer at this point because, Ben's boy, Donald Trump, was simply a celebrity and became president. So it could be, you could say Oprah if you wanted to, right? Like it could be anybody. Who do you think would make a great president in this country? And this is the last question, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough one because, again, I loved just kind of a side note. You remember when everyone was trashing Garth Brooks for wearing a Barry Sanders jersey in Detroit because it said Sanders 20 on the back and everybody was like crapping on him? Yeah. And he's like, dude, it's Barry Sanders. And then I think Barry Sanders came out and said, hey, well, I'll run for president. You want to be vice president? And I'm like, Barry Sanders, Garth Brooks, I'm voting. But in reality, I mean, so the ideal candidate to me, I think I've talked to Ben about this, is I said, the ideal candidate for me is going to be a moderate. And a moderate doesn't win. That's the problem. So I'm a middle-of-the-road guy, and middle-of-the-road guys are considered wishy-washy. And the two-party system needs to go. They've monopolized the system into having one of them in office at all times in every single position in Washington. So they fooled the public into thinking that you have to side with one of them because those are the only ideas that exist. So I would love to see somebody come along that's a third party, not affiliated, somebody who will listen to all sides. And so when you say like who's an ideal candidate, I'm like, who would be a political Tony Robbins? Who is somebody who's just going to listen and then be like, okay, I just heard everything you said, and let me ask you a couple more questions, not let me jump down your throat.
Right.
So I don't know who that is. I think in the most recent, by the way, I think Joe Biden's going to get absolutely steamrolled in this election.
Oh yeah, the polls are wrong, man. Biden is going to get laid out.
We better get debates. Because that is the TV that I need.
I've said it before. It's going to be Donald Trump throwing around his schoolyard insults, and Biden forgetting that he's not actually in the schoolyard back in the early 1930s, 40s, whatever it was, and he's literally going to get into a fist fight or try and get into a fist fight during the debate because of his dementia, and it's going to be awesome TV.
Does anything perfectly encapsulate America besides Trump Biden 2020? Because we talk about like just overreactions galore. That's what this whole show is kind of about. People overreacting about things, right?
Yeah.
And what bigger overreaction is there to somebody with no political experience than somebody who was elected before they were old enough to take office? It's just the extremes, And so personally, I'll say that, my favorite candidate going into this whole thing, I was really rooting for Tulsi. I like that she's a military person. She seemed to have her level head. I like that she went on The View and they tried to shred her and she completely knocked them senseless. So she was somebody who I really liked. I am ready for a female president. I think we could have that, but I don't think that America is ready for that because it does seem like such a big reaction to Trump to have a female president or have a gay president or some sort of, I guess, quote unquote minority president. Right. That would be a reaction to Trump. And so the Democrats didn't want to go that way, but the Democrats are all idiots. So they ended up going with Joe Biden, and most likely it's probably going to be Elizabeth Warren as his vice president. And how just disgusting a ballot is that?
Yeah.
Jeez. So Ben, who would your ideal president be? Obviously, after your ideal president finishes the next 4 years,
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. No, no. Honestly, I don't know. I really like Tim Scott. I think he's a possibility. Just because he might be able to really bring the country back together. He's very. He's more progressive on the race issues, but still a conservative at heart. I think I don't know. It's going to be interesting because I've also predicted, and I'll predict it here on episode 5 of Ad Hominem. I believe that in 2024 we very likely will see the first female president, and she will be a Republican. That is an opinion I have. And a lot of people are going to be pissed off about it, but there are some governors and some people in Trump's cabinet that he's really grooming, and I can see that happening, especially if he gets a second term, which I do believe he's going to because of the ticket. Because you're right, Wayne. I mean, it's probably going to be Elizabeth Warren or someone like Kamala Harris, and both of those candidates are just going to rub everyone the wrong way. I mean, Elizabeth Warren couldn't even win a primary in her own state, never mind win on a ticket with Joe Biden. So, I don't know who the president's who I'd like to see be president in 2024, but I do think it's, like I said, I do think it could be a female, and I think if it is a female, she will be a Republican.
Well, I'm all in on Yang. Yang.
Yeah, I like Andrew Yang a lot too.
I'm all in on Yang. I'm all in.
I know you'd asked me earlier that my favorite president of my lifetime, and I said that was a difficult one. So my favorite presidential candidate of my lifetime is Ron Paul. And what I love about Ron Paul, I don't agree with everything that he stands for. I'm not a true libertarian, but I love the idea of smaller government. I don't necessarily agree with going back to the gold standard, but my favorite thing about Ron Paul, and I posted this statistic years and years ago when he was actually considering running or ran, is something like, not only does he show up for every vote in Congress, we see so many of these absentee votes, he votes down 98% of the bills that are put in front of him because they have so much pork in them. He will not vote for a bill that has something attached to it. And I think that's the kind of character that I want in office. Somebody who's going to say, listen, you want to have a bill that's going to promote clean water. It can't be clean water and a bailout for Walmart. You want a bill that's going to be a bailout for Walmart. It can't be Walmart with clean water. Give me one bill that covers one thing and I'll vote for it, yes or no, but I'm not going to vote for 1,800 attachments.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I actually like that. I mean, my favorite presidential candidate, just simply for his name, is Dick Sweat. So it's I mean, that's my favorite person to run for president anyway. It doesn't get better than that name, I'll tell you that. Wayne, we've loved having you on. I mean, I feel like we probably could have had like a 2.5, 3 hour special with Wayne, especially if we went into the Tom Brady and LeBron stuff. We could have gone down rabbit holes we weren't coming back from. But Wayne, maybe we can have you on again, man. This has been really good.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I love branching out. I love talking about stuff other than sports. Like I said, me and Ben have had a lot of discussions on Facebook, and I think one of the things I really appreciate about him is I've always considered. I'd explained this to my wife before I came on the show. I said, I'm a moderate. I said I kind of think that Ben's a little bit of a moderate as well, but he tends to lean more right, and I lean more left. I said, but. Sure. I think that the two of us, whenever we have conversations, I think that both of us can stay open-minded. Neither one of us gets mad. It's kind of like, well, I see what you're saying there, but what about this? And if it's very, very civil, And I think we need more.
We have found common ground in the past as well. I know on certain topics, just through that dialogue.
And that's something that you don't hear often, and that's why, I mean, really the main reason why Ben and I wanted to do this show.
Yeah, I mean, you need to have, in order to educate people are educated through discourse. And the problem is that nobody's ever taught them how to have civil discourse. And so it ends up just being Thanksgiving shouting matches, right? And I've always said, so if there's one piece of knowledge I can give people when it comes to debating or just listening to people, no matter how infuriating or how wrong somebody may seem in their idea, just understand that their idea is based on their life experiences and the information that they have to them, just like your ideas are based on your life experiences and the information that you have. So instead of getting mad at them for having that opinion, why don't you try to find out what led to that opinion? And that will help everybody, I think, get along a little bit better.
Yeah, I like that because I quote Christopher Hitchens quite a bit on this show, as Ben can attest to. And one of the things he used to say was that some will say that arguments produce a lot of heat and not a lot of, or discourse produces a lot of heat and not a lot of light, but you can't get one without the other.
Right.
So I think that's I always take that into consideration, and I love it. I love a good debate, and I love open-mindedness even more than a good debate. So with you there. As far as this show goes, ad hominem, Nick, Ben, you're going to have this show up and running here in the next day or so. And
as usual, it'll be posted by tomorrow on Friday. Again, Wayne, we loved having you. We'd like everyone to share, and subscribe our YouTube channel, our video on Facebook. Wayne, anything you want to plug that you're doing before we sign off?
Sure. Like I said, I do have a podcast. It's called Infinity Sports, and we are on the RTF Sports Network, and we air every Thursday at 11 a.m., but the podcasts usually drop every Saturday. And if you visit rtfsportsnetwork.com, not only can you find access to all their shows, including Infinity Sports, but there's a blog section as well. I have a great blog there for why Jared Stidham is going to go 11-5, so you guys check that out, as well as why Wilt Chamberlain is the greatest player of all time. There's a great article there. I write a lot of really good human interest pieces. I did one about Brian Taylor, Ronnie Fields, just some sadder stuff. But there's a lot of great blogs on there, so I definitely have people check out that site. And obviously, I'll promote you guys, through the Infinity Sports channels as well.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and Wayne, we'll add a link to the to your site under the comment section of this post.
Perfect.
Yeah, awesome, Good stuff, Wayne. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me.
This is Nick signing off. Ben,
have a good one, guys.